we've got a really, really special interaction now with the Finance Minister of India. Yes, we are in a second. In a second, we're going to be discussing unleashing the ambitions of global India. We're just waiting for the Honourable Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who I'm really excited to be joined by. So much to discuss. And I'll just tell you the little format, what we're going to do. I'm going to speak to the Honourable Minister for about 17 minutes, and then I'm going to call a very special panel onto the stage who are going to ask the Finance Minister some questions. That doesn't happen often. We let you up here to ask the Finance Minister some questions. So I'll start off. I'll make it easy for you, so when you get onto the stage, she'll be ready for your truly difficult questions. So that's going to be in a few seconds' time. We're just waiting for the Honourable Minister. So much to discuss. I'm just going to give you a sneak preview of some of the things I'm going to speak about. The Indian economy, it's racing ahead versus its G20 peers. Is that sustainable? One of the things we're going to be talking a lot about, Edie and I, in the next couple of days is this amazing India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor that's been announced during the G20 presidency under India. However, there are geopolitical headwinds which might make it difficult to implement. Let's get to the Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, thank you very much for joining us today. Big round of applause. Thank you for joining us today. Honourable Minister, I'm just going to fire away with the first question because I've got so much to ask you before our illustrious panel joins us. As you know, Honourable Minister, the IMF is predicting great things for the Indian economy this year, next year. They're looking for growth of 6.3%. India is going to outgrow all its G20 counterparts. But Honourable Minister, how is it going to sustain that leading position given the geopolitical headwinds we have, given the interest rate difficulties we have, and given the demand challenges that all the countries of the world are facing?
First of all, let me say thank you to the India Global Forum for having me here with you. And also, good evening from a rainy and cold Delhi. The question that you've asked is absolutely critical for India. The domestic market and also our macroeconomic fundamentals are fairly well rooted. So whilst we think indicators within India are comfortably placed because of our stable policies, predictable tax domains, and so on. Factors outside are beyond our control. You're right in saying that's one of the things on which we are going to have challenge. Consumption is falling in many Western economies. Why should that affect me? It should affect me because our exports are so much dependent on the European market or the advanced economies markets, where if the demand is falling, our exports are going to be adversely affected. So that is one of the indicators that the challenges are posing downside risks. Similarly, the US Fed's interest rate policy and also the inflation situation in all over the Western economies, interest rate being high for long is also having a bearing on how investments are going to flow into India. And the exchange rate, particularly for the Indian rupee versus the US dollar, is another factor on which I would think we have to keep a continuous watch. So our growth rate, whilst has the comfort of a large captive domestic market and also the bulk middle class which has the purchasing power giving us the comfort. It certainly is one of the several factors which are so necessary for our growth. The others, I would think, are largely challenges from outside.
Yeah. Honourable Minister, we've just come to the conclusion, almost to the day, of India's G20 presidency. It's been called many things. It's been called unprecedented, unforgettable. Many say it's left an indelible mark on India and the world. I don't want to delve into that because we haven't got enough time, but I do want to delve into a massive announcement, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This is grand in vision, but it's going to be difficult to implement due to the geopolitical challenges we face. Let's not go into it, particularly in the Middle East right now. What's it going to take to translate this grand vision into reality?
Well, as you said, it is a vision and a vision for long-term considerations, and it is going to be a long-term project. It's not just going to depend on one or the other major event pertaining to the area. It is going to be pursued because India has a very good relationship with each of the Middle East countries. Now, I would just like to emphasize on how Prime Minister Modi has very carefully built this relationship over the 8 or 9 years that he's been in power. Take, for example, United Arab Emirates, with whom we have a very friendly and good relationship, mutual respect, and literally the chemistry which prevails between the leadership in both the countries. Prime Minister Modi has visited UAE 5 times in 8 years, but this is the 9th year going into the 10th, so 8 times. And when he did first in 2015, he was the first Prime Minister of India to visit UAE in about 34 years. So it has nurtured and carefully built a relationship. So not just the UAE, so with the Saudi Arabia, so would, I would think, with each of the Middle East Emirates and also with Oman and so on. So IMEC, as I would refer to it, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, is not going to be dependent on one or the other major event of concern, but it is something on which the vision drives the implementation in the long run. So it's going to face challenges, all right, but it has got its own strength, and countries who are directly or indirectly in connection with this project are absolutely clear that this, through India, is going to be critical for global trade, global partnerships, and also making sure that this corridor will benefit each one of these countries.
Honourable Minister, I'm glad you mentioned Prime Minister Modi, because many are saying the 5 state elections that are taking place this month are a referendum on him. I'll leave that for the pundits to debate. I want to talk elections. The state elections ahead of next year's national elections. What's your message to global investors who may be jittery about the outcome of the 2024 elections on the economy?
I would think they need not be jittery at all. To be unclear, to be keeping their fingers crossed and so on is normal, and I can understand that. But here am I, and also there are several people who are observing the Indian economy, observing the political environment, observing the ground level realities, and the situation as it prevails today is Prime Minister Modi is coming back, and coming back with good majority.
So we had a
That is because
yeah, it's interesting you say he's coming back with a good majority. Earlier, Honourable Minister, we had a discussion calling keeping the black swans at bay. Would you say that Modi losing the election next year would be a black swan?
no, I wouldn't put it at that at all. Because the 8 or 9 years today and the 10th year by the time we go to the election, to be fair, Indian voters, citizens who are eligible
Oh,
place in India, not just a transformation on macro issues, not just a transformation on the way in which external affairs is handled, but in the daily lives of every Indian. They are able to see how conducting business or affairs of the government or the way in which government interacts with them are all now so citizen driven. Very many basic necessities which did not reach common citizens in far-flung areas. The metropolitan towns probably had it given to them earlier, but in the far-flung areas, you find the way in which the current government has implemented policies has reached every citizen. So it is not as if this government has worked for one and not for the other. It has worked for everybody.
Honourable Minister, I'd like to dispute that because there are concerns about job creation. Let's face it, the Indian economy, yes, it's growing, 6.3% projections for the next year or two, but it isn't growing fast enough to create jobs for the millions of people that need it. There's the big issue of youth unemployment. We can dispute whether it's 10%, 15%, 23%. It's big and it's higher than its neighbors. Have you done enough to tackle youth unemployment? Are you doing enough to create the jobs that's needed for the millions to grow this economy?
I'll give my answer on two different silos which relate to jobs. Both relate to jobs. One is the government positions, meaning working for the government of India, where in the last 1 year, literally every month, there is what is called as a Rozgar Mela, meaning a day-long event where jobs are or the appointment letters are handed over to people who have got the jobs for positions in the central government. So they're government jobs. We've fixed a target by December this year. 10 lakh jobs will be given. And in the process, every month, giving jobs to the citizens in Government of India jobs has touched 8 lakhs already. So we will be taking it further and by December, completing the 10 lakhs that we have kept as a target. So filling up the positions which are government jobs, which are a job till you retire, that is, provided you keep up with your skills and everything else. There are no conditions otherwise attached. Security of the job, it prevails in the government sector. So that is one of the sides. The other is for those very poor trading people or those who are street vendors or people who run their own small businesses, MSMEs, micro and small and medium industries, are all given sovereign guaranteed jobs, meaning they do not, they can approach a bank, that is, and obtain loans from the bank, for some of them at concessional rate of interest and for some others at prevailing market rate of interest, but for all of them with the sovereign guarantee provided. So they don't need to come with a fixed deposit in lieu of a guarantee or a piece of land in lieu of a guarantee and so on. So they're guaranteed by Government of India for the first loss, and then they're getting the interest subvented loans in some cases and others general loan. But the idea behind this is to make sure people who want to do their own will have enough credit available for running their business. And in the process, if they grow, they can employ more people rather than look for a government job. That cannot be for everybody available, and therefore self-employment has also been given a good lot of incentives and across the board in the country for a bulk of the population.
Honourable
So
Minister.
we have dealt with, yeah.
Yeah, so I want to jump in because I've only got another 2 minutes with you, and I want to be selfish and utilize them to the greatest extent before I bring my panelists on stage. As you know, we're in Dubai. We're super excited about COP28. What's on India's wish list for COP? What are you doing? What's India doing to ensure that COP isn't all talk and no action? Because we know it's been criticized as just being this grand talking shop which never results in any action. What are you doing as a nation to ensure that that doesn't happen?
A very relevant for the current situation kind of question. And I'm glad you asked this. India will certainly be pushing forward to showcase what it has achieved with its own funds. The Paris commitment given by us have been funded by us. We didn't wait for the 100 billion. That is never on the table. There's, as you said, a lot of talk, but no money coming on the table. No pathways to show how technology is going to be transferred. Now, an additional problem which comes on board for discussion this time around would be the transitional phase, where you do not know what is affordable energy, what energy actually can fit into this transition energy requirement. It's certainly not fossil fuel, but what is it then? You've really not completely moved over to renewable, so what is it then? So the transitional energy, its definition, what constitutes something which actually can be a transitional source of energy, and who gives the money for it, particularly for developing and emerging market economies. Funding this transition is going to be a huge challenge. So I would think the conversations can happen, a lot of talk can happen, but eventually COP28 should show the direction both for transfer of technology and for the actual funding, be it a blended finance, public and private partnership or philanthropies coming in, but finance it is required. So that's what I would think India would go to argue.
Honourable Minister, I'm going to invite our illustrious panellists onto the stage, and one by one, they're going to ask you a question. So please come to the stage. Gautam Shroff, Principal Partner at Nuvama Private; Shefali Garadia, Chairperson Deloitte India; Mathoni Matonyi, CEO and founder of Girani; and Prashant Prakash, Partner at Excel. We've got an illustrious panel, Honourable Minister, to fire some gritty questions your way. To my left, as Gautam is with me, take to the floor, Gautam. Not actually, just as you're with us. Please ask the Honourable Minister your question.
Ma'am, on behalf of the investment community that I represent, India and globally, I first want to congratulate you and thank you for navigating the Indian economy through the difficult geopolitical situation. Nuvama, my firm.
Thank you.
Nuvama, my firm, our research always believed that, we are headed towards 5 trillion and 7 eventually. So when we meet global investors, the question that we get asked is, what more is the government going to do to accelerate this path towards 7 trillion?
Well, specifically continue with the reforms process. I'm grateful to the Honorable Prime Minister because even during COVID, when our attention was to make sure people are given enough protection, vaccine to be scaled up for all citizens, and also make sure that the economy does not get dragged down because of the lockdown and so on, even then the Honorable Prime Minister had guided us to make sure that the reform process does not stagger, does not suffer. So I think that in spirit tells us that the commitment to reform of the systemic reforms is there 100%. So we will be continuing to make the Indian economy a lot more open and transparent, to make sure that equally, without looking inwards, we will ensure that investments happen in India so that people can produce in India for Indian market, but equally at ease export from India as well. So the emphasis on reform, the emphasis on Atmanirbhar Bharat, and making sure that our skilled, well-trained youth do contribute for the global economy by participating in the global value chains is what I think will take us towards the goals that you have so clearly identified.
Shefali.
Honorable Minister, I first of all would like to congratulate you on a very successful implementation of the goods and service tax regime. GST has completed 6 years in India, and it has been implemented, in almost a perfect way, very harmoniously operating between the center and states. Even the industry, including the MSMEs, have given a big thumbs up to the GST at 6 survey, even higher than compared to what they gave for GST at 5. And more recently, what we've seen is that once the statute of limitation has kicked in, there has been a flurry of activities, including some of the notices that have been issued and the manner in which some of the audits and investigations have been conducted. And this has given a bit of a concern to the international community. Many multinationals have, expressed their concern about, where this is going to lead to. My question to you, Madam, is that in such an environment, what assurance can we give to the international community about the tax certainty and how we propose to implement that in India?
Thank you for observing how GST has settled on the ground and how it has made businesses feel at ease about the taxation, and how the GST Council, which I may add here, has worked as a very good example of center, state, and the federal structure that is highly honored through the GST Council. Finance ministers from the provinces all sit together. I'm there as well on behalf of the union government. We take decisions together, and 99% decisions are unanimous. So there is this constitutional body which has been created to post 2014 with a great deal of effort through Prime Minister Modi and my predecessor, who I fondly remember, late Shri Arun Jaitley. This structure, constitutional body, has actually brought about great deal of comfort in having a one nation, one tax principle effectively brought to the ground. Of course, it has teething problems. Of course, there are issues where some issues prior to 2017, when GST came into place, are still lingering. Some are with the courts, some are not. Those are getting ironed out. And in the process, because tax authorities are very conscious that they do not want to miss out on the due allowed time, notices do go, and if there are replies given, they are taken on board. So we are still at a stage where we are on some grounds moving from uncertainty to certainty, but the uncertainty appears before you because you see the GST already in ground, but some aspects are getting sorted out now.
Thank you.
Mathoni.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for this opportunity to ask you questions. And thank you, Professor Manoj and the India Global Forum team for enabling this. So, Honorable Minister, my question to you is, when you consider India's fiscal and economic strategies, how do you think that similar approaches could be adopted in Africa, and in particular Kenya, to promote the economic development in those African countries?
Thank you. Yes, the fiscal rectitude is something which is not in your face, but it is certainly undercurrent in this government. So constant managing your fiscal affairs and complying to the FRBM Act, that is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, so that you are not going to be profligate with the finances, because public finance equally is to generate revenue but also to manage your budget well in its structure, has been a priority of this government. But if I have to talk about Africa, I would say Prime Minister Modi, in probably when he was in Uganda in 2018, had spoken about how there are guiding principles for India, for its relationship with the African countries as well. Africa forms a priority for India, but even as we set it as a priority, we are getting influenced by your priorities in setting up our priority. So it is not as if India sets its own priority dealing with African countries, but Africa's priorities are taken on board when we set our own priority towards Africa, particularly with the least developed countries, LDCs. I'd like to highlight that we have, since the time Prime Minister Modi came in 2014, it has been, without a second thought, a point to promote the tariff-free, quota-free relationship with all the LDCs of Africa. So we absolutely don't restrict African products which come from LDCs within Africa, and that's helped in building trust and relationship with the African countries. There are several, I would think there are 4 areas. Sorry to have a longish answer, but there's so much to say, and I'll take this liberty to say, on development related activities. Africa received about 32 billion, or 38% of all credit extended by India goes to Africa. And also in health, I think we are one of the largest suppliers of generic medicine, so make it available at affordable rates for African citizens. Then, equally important, I think Dr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Affairs Minister for India, had launched in October 2023 2 technology-driven programs. One is tele-education, which we call E-Vidya Bharati. The other is the telemedicine, which is the E-Arogya Bharati. E-Arogya Bharati actually is a project which can help free telemedicine courses for more than 1,000 doctors and paramedics from Africa. Like the way e-teleeducation helps 500 courses to be taught for 15,000 students in Africa. And lastly, the 4th point is the defense cooperation we have with countries, particularly Comoros, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, South Africa and Madagascar, essentially members of the Indian Ocean Rim countries. Then we also have the India-Africa Defense Dialogue, which has happened in 2020 in Lucknow and also in Gandhinagar in 2022. So with Africa, we are actively engaged. I spoke of 4 buckets of cooperation, but each one for their own requirements.
I'm glad we got that question in on development in Africa, and it's a theme we're going to be discussing a lot more in the next few days. Prashant, no pressure.
Honorable Minister, IFSCA has been really one of your landmark initiatives, and it has already started to show a lot of promise and catalyze global fund flows. My question is are there things that we can do to further make it a preferred destination for sovereign funds, especially from the region here where there are a lot of active sovereign funds like RDI and PIF? They have certain concerns when it comes to the tax regime. And are there any ideas, ma'am, there or dialogues to land them and in an accelerated fashion and further increase the value of IFSC as a destination for this region.
Good to see you here, Prashant. Mostly
Nice.
seeing you in Bangalore.
Thank you. Thank you.
But yes, the question about investors, particularly sovereign funds, is something on which I think since 2019 I've been actively engaged in. We had quite a few sovereign funds from the Middle East, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of them coming up with their requests, and we readily have conceded that the tax treatment being offered to sovereign funds, particularly Mubadala and the sovereign funds, other sovereign funds of the Middle East, have all been given favorable tax treatments. Post that, I think a lot of others have also come in, like those from Canada, those from Australia. We've given them favorable tax treatment, and therefore they are able to look at the national infrastructure pipeline and also the NIIF, National Infrastructure Investment Fund, and participate in many brownfield programs. Most of them prefer brownfield, but they are happy to look at greenfield projects as well. But we have continued this tradition of dealing with sovereign funds and tax treatments for them being differently placed. So I think at the moment we will continue with that.
Thank you.
Honourable Minister, just before I let you go, I've got one more minute. I'm going to squeeze in a final question. As I alluded to earlier, we did have a panel on black swans, and there were concerns about AI, climate, about demographics, about cyber crimes, about the dominance of technology in the hands of a few. There were concerns about the lack of leadership dealing with the big issues we face in the world today. There were geopolitical concerns. So my final question to you is, what is your biggest concern right now when it comes to, let's deem it a black swan, a grey swan, and does India have that leadership which the panel was pleading for to deal with black swan events?
I look at AI, first of all, for the opportunities that it can provide us. Let me start with the fact that in this budget which was presented on 1st February 2023 for the current year, which is the running year, we had announced that India shall become a hub for AI-based research. And we announced 3 centers of excellence for AI, which will go into in-depth research on the opportunities that AI provide, and that shall be something which we'll be happy to locate in some of the premier institutions in India. So we are looking at AI for the opportunity that it provides. We are in close collaboration with NASSCOM, India's, let's say, association which actually looks at these areas of activity, and they are actively guiding us on how we can take this forward. So that is one side of the story. The other is for all the AI-driven, or for being sure that we have adequate firewalls, literally 24/7, monitoring where the hits are coming from, and making sure additional precautions are taken, particularly for systemic institutions, what we call as systemically important institutions. We have come up with very active engagement with India's CERT-In, which is a body run by the government, which essentially looks at all the digital and also the assets which deal with technology. And therefore, this collaboration between CERT-In and the institutions which are systemically important is very much on the avoiding the grey swans or black swans. Of course, when it happens in the sense you are as strong as the weakest link. But to make sure that the weakest link is completely strengthened and not remain weak, there is a lot of action from the government side as well. So we keep doing it and hopefully we'll prevent the black swan.
Honourable Minister, it's been a privilege. Thank you so much for your time and for answering those wonderful questions from our panellists. A big round of applause. Thank you very much for joining us today.